aware that we're recording the session?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We can start. Coming back, I need coffee.
Okay, no problem, Gabby. You can listen to us. But today, first of all, welcome to this meeting number 2. So what we are going to do in this module, we are going to focus on second language acquisition theories that are called SLA, SLA, and how they can be applied to English second language instruction online. So second language acquisition refers to how a second language is learned or acquired. Is English your second language? Is it?
Yeah, for me it is.
For Maria Clara?
No, it's my first.
It's my first. So do you speak any other languages?
I speak Swahili and struggling with Italian.
Struggling with Italian. So you do. So, and you know from your own experience that learning a second language, it's no easy task. And that the teachers, the learning environment, the course materials are very influential. And it can have a great impact on your acquisition on the language. So first, we will talk about an introduction to the second language acquisition, this SLA, and the importance of input and output. Then we will discuss the importance of interaction and feedback. If time allows, we will get into practice, or otherwise we're gonna do in next for next meeting. Okay, because I prepared a lot of stuff. So unfortunately today we have to face a bit of theories, and I think that probably some of you that you already, I mean, people that are connected here and people that they will be connected later, probably you already know most of the theories I'm going to talk about. But I think it's very important to have a starting point where we can continue to discuss on. Okay, so I'm gonna immediately, without waiting longer, sharing my screen. And we are going to see our first. Okay. Okay, overcoming the difficulties of learning a new language online. Difficulties are so many. And of course, which are the pillars of SLA, second language acquisition. So that was, we were discussing just a minute before we were starting. How many languages can you speak, actually? 2, 3. Maria Clara is speaking at least 3 languages. Gabby, at least 3 as well. Helena, probably the same. And
yeah, a little bit of French, a little bit of Swedish, but nothing fluent as English. Okay.
No, but anyway, you know that it's very challenging.
Yes.
So I think, let me put just the thumbnail here. Okay, so learning a new language can be just as hard as frustrating as learning to drive a stick shift or manual transmission if you have only ever driven an automatic transmission. This is mostly for people. I got so many friends, they're coming from America, and even not just from America, even from other countries, and they found it so difficult to drive without the automatic transmission. And so I think that more or less learning a new language is the same, because you feel confident driving an automatic transmission, just like you do when speaking your first language. But when you try driving a stick shift, the car will not do what you want it to do it, and your confidence may fade. Likewise, when you try to speak a new language, you may feel less confident expressing your ideas. You often know what you would like to express to others and just cannot find the words you need to express yourself. You see, there are so many things to know, and we have to understand people that we have in front of us. So in addition, of course, online learning can cause new feelings of frustration and create a lack of confidence for some students. Students who may be to this mode of learning or who may not be familiar or comfortable with virtual learning platforms may be hesitant to engage fully, despite their age, despite their preparation. It just technological means, that is, it could be difficult. It can be overwhelming and sometimes confusing without proper and effective support. They might feel isolated from their classmates and you, the teacher. Preparing students for online tasks is an important part of effective online teaching. Make sure students know how to do such tasks and send a message via the platform messaging system, post on a discussion board, type in the chat feature, enable their microphone, etc. Provide how-to videos and guides when appropriate. This is something that we already discussed in the past module. Set clear expectation at the beginning of each online course and live class session so that students know exactly what is expected of them. Communicate often with individual students via messaging, feedback, discussion platform, and virtual class meetings and or individual conferences. In this way, you can help students overcome some of the difficulties of online language learning. Passion and understanding of the, let's call it SLA, second language acquisition. I don't repeat it every time now. I call it SLA process, and the challenges of online learning are the keys to effective online language teaching and learning. So let's start with the second language acquisition regarding input. What it is input. Mm-hmm. So first of all, what is SLA? We understood what is it. So second language acquisition, or SLA, is a term language teaching professionals and scholars use to describe the process of learning or acquiring a second language. This term is based on the idea that through communication, a person picks up a second language by subconsciously processing language input or the language they see or read and hear. There are various theories that support SLA as a process. However, we will only cover a few of them in this meeting, not all of them, of course, because this is not just a university lesson, but it's one just to be a tool to work better in our job. So I have to spend a few words on Krashen theory. I don't know if you know Stephen Krashen, that was born and still alive. It was born on May the 14th in 1941, and is a professor emeritus at the University of Southern California. He is a linguist, educational researcher, and political activist. So Krashen introduced us to the idea that in SLA, the input which learners receive must be comprehensible. Input is referred to as the written and spoken language that learners are exposed to inside and outside the classroom. In other words, input is the language students read and hear. it is essential that learners be exposed to input in order to acquire a second language. According to Prussian, in 1982, he wrote it, it is best to provide learners with I+1, which means input they already know, plus some input with which they are not yet familiar. Essentially, I+1 is comprehensible input, and we, as ESL teachers, must do our best to provide our students with it, as it contributes in their acquisition of English as a second language. So, if you're teaching a live session online, do not be afraid of using some language structures and words that your students might not know yet. By providing them with the opportunity to listen or to read some language that is a step above their level, you are assisting the slow process as their brains piece together context clues and come to conclusions about what the new words and structures mean. When it's comprehensible, input is given to learners authentically and in a meaningful communicative context. Learners will process new language, structure, and vocabulary subconsciously. This is what we always do with our children. So we are not gonna, there's somebody that is. Wait a moment, because I see there's a chart here. Oh yes, we are going to scaffolding. Yeah, you see, that's something that we are going to speak about. I've cut this lesson a bit because the second part was entirely devoted to oral learning. So I have already prepared this there. So if you want, we can even discuss on there later. But I think that now we have to be concentrated on the first part.
Paola, we are going to need the adult. We are going to need the adult because there is a side project that is going to be starting in September. Teaching adults online. It's not going to be called Play with Gabby. It's going to be called Smart English.
I didn't know.
Yeah, that's a new project that is
fantastic.
It's being launched in September. So we are going to be needing the adult part too.
So, okay, so as I've prepared in this kind of presentation, there is actually, because I cut it, but it's there, I mean, I got in a file there, all the other part that we can discuss. Let's see how we are going on and how do we arrive at the end of this presentation, and then we decide together what to do. If
we need an extra session in September on just adult teaching online, we can do that, right, Paola?
Okay, no problem.
An extra training.
Okay, no problem at all. You know, it's the material is all done. It's all done. Okay. So if you feel that students are not able to understand the majority of what you are saying, make sure to check their understanding by asking them to repeat the last thing you said. You may provide notes in the chat box as well to support the learning, like Gabby have just done. Some students understand written language better than spoken language, depending on their previous educational experiences. And we know, I mean, my experience, of course, is now is huge, that in Italian school, people, especially adults, they study a lot on written and reading. So they're very good in reading, but actually they have no practice at all in speaking. So it is okay anyway to repeat yourself and slow down the pace. Simplify your language or show a visual representation of what you are talking about if you observe that your comprehensible input is entirely incomprehensible. We can make these types of adjustment, but be careful be careful not to make a habit out of talking to students too loudly, too clearly, or slowly, as they will get used to this type of speech and struggle to understand authentic speech during interactions outside the class. Overall, it is recommended that you are as authentic or natural as possible when speaking and writing to your students, so that they get the opportunity to receive authentic input. And this is crucial. I do suggest you, here is the link of the whole book is online, so it's a PDF, so you can download it. And believe me, if you know it, of course, you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't know it, I do suggest to have as a summer reading, because it's written, I mean, Krashen is really great, because it was started in '82. I mean, even before, of course, but his theories are so updated. And so let's follow it. So let's speak about authentic input. What is authentic input? So it's written or spoken language that comes from a source that was produced by a native or bilingual speakers within their cultural context. For example, authentic written information could be a news article about a crime that took place in Cumbria, published by BBC. If we read this news article, we know that it's relevant to the cultural context and originally written in English, not translated from another language. Another example could be a song in English like Yesterday by the Beatles. When we listen to this song, we can be sure that it was originally written in English for an English-speaking audience in an English-speaking culture and context. It is not uncommon anyway to find non-authentic readings and conversation in ESL textbook, being as they were written with a specific focus on particular words and structures instead of natural communicative language. So many grammar books that you found, especially if you are getting into schools, and they use sometimes grammar books completely published and written in Italian. This is the example of the authentic input. So for this reason, it is important that we as teachers communicate with students the way we would with other English speakers, and provide them with other sources of input which are authentic and clear. In online ESL instruction, we have the advantage that the internet is at our fingertips, as well as the fingertips of our students, don't forget it. And we can easily share authentic input simply by selecting appropriate material and sharing our screen with the class, or by sending links via chat or email. Remember that for the last modules, I've prepared for you more than 100 links of tools. So it would be a kind of encyclopedia of links, tools, and everything you can use during your lessons. Nice. So this is the real, news. What about output? Easy, of course. While input is necessary for SLA, so is output, of course. It is the language that the learner produces, either written or spoken. So input helps learners with their receptive skills, and output is a demonstration of the learner's productive skills. It is common for learners to advance in their receptive skills before they're able to produce language, like children do, of course. They understand much in advance before they start to speak. Learners will often say, I understand more than I speak. when asked about their abilities in a second language. There are some theories related to the importance of output in SLA. For example, Merrill Swain in 1985, comprehensible output hypothesis. This hypothesis states that when learners are required to understand the person they are speaking with and then respond to a question or comment, they then realize what they do not know how to say, not before. Consequently, learners become aware of their gaps in the second language and must push themselves to learn what they need to know in order to express themselves properly. As ESL teachers, it is important that we think of learner output during live online sessions. Students need opportunities in conversation in which they are required to produce language, both orally and in written form, depending on age and level, of course, because, you know, the written form is not required before a certain age or before a certain level. In a one-on-one sessions, it is much easier for the teacher to elect output from the student due to the nature of the one-on-one conversation, of course. However, if there are multiple students in the session, the teacher must design communicative activities that require students to respond to each other's questions and comments. So why it is essential that we provide sufficient input to our learners, it is equally important that we design activities which elect output. This way, our learners have the opportunity to produce language. And this is written in another book I mentioned here that you can find on the internet. It's not online. I mean, the text you can have just some extract online, but the old one, if you want, you can buy. It's not the same. It's not as important as the Crucian one, but I put the title here. So let's try to do a summer quiz. So our quiz, because we were laughing at our quizzes last time, but you know, they're just to have a summary of what we are talking about from the beginning up to now. So, number one, what is the most important thing for us to remember about difficulties of learning a new language? One, it is like driving a manual transmission. It is like reading backwards. Translate for students in their language. Be patient and understanding at all times. What do you think? 1, 2, 3, or 4? You want to reply now? What do you say, Gabby? I think we can do it. There are just 6 very, very simple questions to summary all the things. So what do you think, Elena?
You mentioned the manual transmission, but I think that it's also okay. I would say number 1, but maybe
but
I don't know.
The most important thing to remember about those difficulties is that we have to be patient and understanding at all times. I think is, of course, it's like driving a manual transmission, but it's not important that we remember about the difficulties. Okay. What is second language acquisition? One, a conscious process in which language learning takes place. 2, a class you take in college or learn by doing. 3, learning a language without a teacher. 4, a process by which a person learns a language through communication and exposure to authentic language. What do you think, Maria?
I think it's 4.
It is 4. It is 4. Even if some of the others, they can have some hints, but it's not referred to to the SLA. So what language skills does input refer to? In other words, what skills does the learner demonstrate when receiving input? Reading and listening, writing and reading, speaking and listening, writing and speaking. What about
Reading and listening.
reading and listening? Yeah.
Because they are, let's say, passive
Yes.
activities. Okay.
That's it. So let's do it even the other one. Oh, my beloved question. So what is the principal idea behind Krashen's I+1 hypothesis? Students need to be exposed to input that is too advanced for them. Students need to be exposed to input with which they are familiar, as well as input that is just above their level of comprehension. Students need to be exposed to any input they find interesting. Students should learn one new vocabulary word every day. What do you think, Maria?
It's true.
It's true, yes, it's true, actually, it's true, very clear. Even if some other, they use them by mixing, but this theory is referred to this. What is an example of authentic input? One, a passage in an ESL textbook that was not originally written for native speakers. A recording of other language learners' voices. A news article from an English-speaking country's news source. A list of the common vocabulary words in business.
A news article from an English-speaking country's news source.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah. What language skills does output refer to? In other words, what skills does the learner demonstrate when producing output? Writing and listening, listening and speaking, reading and writing, writing and speaking. Seems a tongue twister.
Or writing and speaking.
Writing and speaking, yes, perfect.
Active.
Yeah, yeah, the activity, yes, producing, just produce.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
output, input first, and immediately together output, okay? Of course, this is a theory, but then I'm going to give you really tons of examples of each theory, how to introduce this theory inside your lessons, and especially considering the digital way. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, now let's go on the pillars of SLA. Interaction. So, of course, output plus input is interaction. When interacting with speakers of the target language, we are expecting naturally to produce language. If someone asks us a question, we must answer immediately. So not only we are expected to produce language, we are expected to produce it instantly. This type of output can often be the most difficult for learners, being as there isn't any time to find words in the dictionary or revise our grammar. Also, during interaction, the feedback we get from the person we are speaking with is instantaneous. In the precise moment that we speak with that person, we are able to see if they understand us or not, simply with their body language or remarks. With isolated output, the feedback we get is delayed, if we get any at all. In order for second language acquisition to happen, learners need to go out and talk to real people, practice the language, and get immediate feedback. If learners do not interact with speakers of the target language in real time, they will not develop the skills needed to communicate in the target language, and they certainly will not acquire this language. So that is basically important for all ages, all levels. In an online ESL classroom, you need to provide students with as many opportunities to interact as possible. Remember, we don't have so much body language that we had in a physical class. They can interact with you, the teacher, who speaks English very well, or with each other. A person does not necessarily need to live in the country of the target language in order to acquire it, if the online language instruction is consistent and interactive. Always try to think of ways to encourage your students to interact with you and their peers, and activities students can do during your session that will invite to encourage interaction. I can just give you an example of what I did yesterday and the day before. We were speaking, I had an adult group online, and we were speaking about shopping. So I prepared for them some prompts. Some of them, they were the shopkeepers and they had a list of stuff they could sell. And some of them, they had the shopping list. Actually, what I did, I gave both one and the other, I mean, two lists. They both had two lists, one for the shopkeeper and one for the customer. They were very clear. I've used them in a class and they were fantastic. When I started to use it in this online session, they start to get confused because they didn't know actually what to do, where to do. So I have made this, I just told them, okay, write on a board which shop you own. So we had all the people in the Zoom with a board in front of here with written, for example, butcher, supermarket. So each one with a list of the shopping list, we're going, okay, I'm going to Maria. She's got a supermarket, and they started to interact together. These are things that usually in a class, in a real class, you don't need it, but you have to elaborate with your experience how to resolve these problems, because of course they couldn't know who was I cannot even locate, for example, in a normal class, I prepare some chairs, and so on that corner, we have the butcher. On the other corner, we have the newsagent, and you know where to go. You actually move inside the class and you do your shopping. In an online session, you can't. So you have to find alternative ways of doing the same very good activity. And then you start asking to the people that are more outgoing, of course, and then the other that can follow even the lower level, especially in conversation class where you have mixed level of learners. So now let's speak a bit about feedback. There are different types of feedback we need in order for language learning to work. And one of them was previously mentioned when we referred to interaction. The way someone responds to our output during interaction tells us a lot about how effectively we are communicating. Interactional feedback is one of the many types of feedback that we need in order for language learning to work. Corrective feedback is also important, which can happen implicitly in the form of recast or explicitly by someone simply point out that what the learner said was wrong. An example of a recast would be if someone says, I go to the mall instead of I went to the mall. An interlocutor says something like, oh, you went to the mall. Sometimes the learner does not pick up the recast as a form of correction and doesn't understand that they made a mistake. So the learner would then continue to say good. That is, even I don't even, it's difficult for me even to pronounce good, until someone gives them an explicit feedback by saying, it's not good, it's went. We need all these types of feedback in order to acquire a second language. Every learner is different, and they will respond differently to these types of feedback. However, feedback in general is a very necessary element of second language acquisition. So it's important that we're giving feedback based on learners' goals. That can be here. Remember, as a teacher, I know that we are really we are like in a therapy session sometimes, not just with adults, even with children. We have to be psychologists actually and understand and feel who we are in front of us. And when it's maybe it's not so difficult when you are in the same room being with this mean, it could be really hard sometimes. So we have to do really an effort to understand them. Anyway, let's speak about the different kind of possibility of feedback. So in small groups or one-to-one online sessions, we have the advantage of being able to ask the learners what they want and need to learn and what their goals are. Once they tell us what they need to do in English, we can structure the course or objectives around their goals. And this is quite easy, of course. For example, if a student wants to know English to travel English-speaking countries and socialize while traveling, we would make sure to focus on the tasks that this person will need to accomplish, like checking into a hotel or asking someone for directions to a restaurant. Sorry. A learner grammar does not need to be perfect in order to accomplish this task, nor do they need academic vocabulary. In addition to practicing tasks, they need the confidence to communicate. Confidence, remember this is very important, can be built or destroyed depending on the feedback we give to our learners. And unfortunately, I know that a lot of teachers, they lose their students because they just correct them continuously before they even speak. I know this is not your case anyway. Let's go. If the learner's goal is to communicate in social setting while traveling to an English-speaking country, we should give them as much positive feedback as possible. And when giving negative feedback, we should focus on communication, on the meaning, rather than perfect grammar and pronunciation. It is also wise to use recast when they need to correct learners. This way, they won't feel like they are being criticized all the time, which is what explicit feedback can feel like at the times, like they do at school, actually. I mean, in high school, usually. However, if the learner's goal is to get a good score on the TOEFL or IELTS standardized test for university studies in an English-speaking country, or even here, then they would structure the lesson and activities around the objective for this type of tests. Then the feedback would need to be more explicit, and there would be a greater focus on correct grammar, of course. But this has to be very clear from the beginning of the course, from the beginning of the lesson. Overall, it is important to find out what our learners' goals are so that we can provide them with the feedback that benefits them the most. Oh, this is something that probably Gaby will like it, the native speaker ideal, because it's something that usually we are discussing quite a lot recently. So when you're teaching ESL, either online or in person, you might feel like you need to constantly correct the pronunciation of your students, holding them to the standard of a native speaker. Giving constant negative feedback in this area is not recommended. And there are many reasons why it is not. First, it is important that you, the teacher, be aware of the scientific theories behind native-like pronunciation in second language acquisition. It may be true that some people have the innate ability or talent to make a diverse variety of sounds, just like some people can teach themselves to play the piano without learning to read music. Unfortunately, this is probably true. However, many second language acquisition experts agree that age has a lot to do with a person's ability to produce native-like pronunciation. That's why they have to start as soon as possible. The critical period hypothesis, for example, they call like this, suggests that there is a critical period for second language acquisition, just as there is for first language acquisition. And many second language acquisition experts agree that the critical period ends around puberty. And this is the reference of the book. Some even say that it's nearly impossible to sound exactly like a native speaker if the second language is acquired after the age of 15. Therefore, younger learners have a better chance to attain a native-like pronunciation than adults. So do not place unrealistic expectations on your students. In the end, we must keep in mind the end goal, which is communication, to understand and to be understood. Correct your students' pronunciation if it interferes with other understanding, but do not hold them to a native speaker standard. People who have foreign accent can communicate just as effectively as those who do not have foreign accent, given that they develop the vocabulary and structures that they need to express themselves. It is best that your feedback to students focuses on other areas, such as word order, choice of vocabulary, verb structures, etc. And here there's another book that is quite interesting, that is called How Languages Are Learned, of 2013. So now, what is the feedback? That we understood is a correction. And what is the corrective feedback? Because as you see, we have many ways of using the feedback with our students. So, feedback, do I go on? Do you want to stop? Do you want to ask something? No.
No, it's okay.
It's okay. Okay. Feedback is what we tell learners about their language production, whether it is positive or negative. So negative feedback, error correction, is also known as corrective feedback. And this is the type of feedback we give learners when they make linguistic errors. Researchers agreed that learners need corrective feedback in order to acquire a new language. But when is feedback most effective? When it is immediate. It is almost more effective when it is directly related to the task and the goals of the student. For example, if a student is preparing to take the IELTS, the teacher should give feedback on grammar, spelling, punctuation, etc. However, if the student wants to be able to communicate better with the friends, the teacher should focus on giving feedback on errors that may prevent communication, such as pronunciation and word stress and word choice. We also have to be careful to pick and choose which errors are more important to correct and how often we correct them, as we don't want to stop the flow of communication. So sometimes, even if it's important that the feedback is immediate, if we run the risk of interrupt the flow of communication, it's better not to give any and wait, because the flow of communication should be the most important thing, especially with very young learners, of course. So that implicit and explicit correction, implicit feedback and explicit correction. Implicit and explicit. Another tongue twister. Let me move the, okay. Implicit feedback. So there are different types of corrective feedback, as we say, and implicit feedback is one of them. This is when the teacher gives feedback without interrupting communication, and is also known as a recast. We always mention the recast. In a recast, the teacher does not explain that the learner has made a mistake. Instead, the teacher repeats what the learner said, but uses the correct form. That I think is the one that you mostly use, the implicit. Make an example. Take a closer look for an example. Yesterday, I bought a lot of clothes, teacher. Oh, you bought a lot of clothes yesterday. Okay. What about explicit? Another form of corrective feedback is explicit feedback. The correction is when the teacher tells the learner they have made an error and provides the correct alternative. Let's do an example. Yesterday, I bought a lot of clothes. You need to say, I bought a lot of clothes, not buy a lot of clothes. That is incorrect. So now, preemptive and reactive focus on forms. What does it mean? So the preemptive, listen to the word preemptive, pre, before. In certain contexts in which we need to correct the learner's grammar or pronunciation errors, we can use preemptive focus on form. This means that the teacher calls out a specific word, grammatical structure, or pronunciation of specific words before the task begins. For example, if you predict that your students will struggle with the present perfect tense and they need to use it for a task you have created, you can use preemptive focus on form. This is very important when you share the same language of your student. For example, if you are Italian and you're teaching to Italian people, you can use a lot of preemptive focus because you know what kind of mistakes and what kind of problems they face. Usually they face always the same problem depending on their native language. Let's use an example. The teacher said, today we are going to focus on the present perfect tense. The present perfect tense is formed by using the verb have plus the past participle. For example, I have lived in New York for 10 years. Let's practice conversation using this form. Or let's do an exercise using this form in a way. What is the reactive focus on form. So pre was before, reactive is of course after. Is another form of strategy for error correction. The name reactive suggests this strategy is used after students make the error. The example, you ask a student how long he or she has lived in Florence, and they respond, I lived in Florence for 5 years. And the teacher corrects them immediately by saying, oh, you mean you have lived in Florence for 5 years, even trying to highlight the error. You have lived in Florence for 5 years. And then there's the usual, the school correction that is called metalinguistic correction. So explicit feedback can also be given in the form of metalinguistic correction. Is when the teacher explains how or why the statement was wrongly formed. The example, student, yesterday I bought a lot of clothes. Buy is an irregular past tense verb, so the past tense of buy is bought, not buy. So this type of feedback is appropriate if your learners are interested in grammar and familiar with grammatical terminology. It's important when you will see and when you are teaching to adults. Italian people usually when they are adults and they start to learn a new language and they are adults, they always ask you for grammar explanation. Usually Italian people depend of course on their level of knowledge and education, but usually the majority of them, they know what an adjective is, what a verb is, so you can easily explain grammar to them because it's the way they were taught anything. I mean, even their language, but especially if they have already studied a bit of English, probably they started with the grammar. And so they are really demanding, usually they're really demanding a lot of grammar explanation. So with adults, you can, the metalinguistic correction probably is correct. But the first thing that I told you before, that you have to set your lesson according to your audience, is the first thing you have to consider. Not to consider other theories, but just to consider that that's you in the class, and the people in front of you, you are responsible for their learning. So giving feedback on pronunciation. So the sound of a language are hard to learn. However, the stress, the correct syllable of a word is not hard to learn. For example, if a student say anecdote instead of anecdote, a native English speaker might have a hard time understanding them. Teaching someone to stress the right syllable will help them to understood by others without causing them to struggle to make sound that they have never made before. Like, I know, we spend a lot of time teaching the th, the d, and all those sounds, they are not typical of other languages, European languages. And if you have ever taught to Asian people, it's much, much harder because they don't have those sounds. So overall, stress plays a more important role in the intelligibility of what is being said than individual sounds do. So remember to focus more on syllable stress when correcting learning pronunciation. As previously mentioned, do not hold your student to a native speaker standard, as native speaker-like pronunciation is not only impossible for most adults, but is unnecessary for communication. However, feedback on pronunciation is important when the learner's pronunciation interferes with them being understood by others. So what I always say in a conversation class, I will stop you and I will correct you just when I don't understand what you say. That's it. Until I understand what you say, let's go on. So what is the real effectiveness of feedback? So both recast and explicit correction lead learners being able to successfully incorporate feedback. In general, recast and explicit correction are more successful than metalinguistic correction. This means that teachers should offer plenty of recast. Explicit correction should also be used. Metalinguistic feedback should be avoided if not necessary, like we mentioned before. Reattempts. This is another important feature. Students must have the opportunity to reattempt to produce language correctly once they have made a mistake. The best way to provide the student a reattempt is to set a situation in which the student is correcting himself while using the language in a realistic way. For example, if you are giving pronunciation feedback, it is best to correct the student and then ask a question using that word so that the student that has the opportunity to correctly pronounce the word in an authentic context. And the modes. Feedback should match the mode in which the error was made. For example, if a student makes a pronunciation error, the teacher or tutor should give oral feedback to correct this mistake. If the error was made in written form, the teacher should correct it in writing. The student should then reattempt in the same mode. Another way of doing it is just point out at the error and let the student correct it by himself. You just say that that is an error, but do not give the solution, do not give the right correction. They will find out probably, it depends on the level, of course, this is you that you decide, but they could try and correct themselves. Or like, you know, with teenager, it works very, very well when you're doing an exercise. Let's think, of course, in a digital classroom, it's not easy, but in a normal class, usually you pass the exercise to your colleague and each student is correcting their colleague exercise, not their own one. But you can do even in a digital class in another way, using the way that we are showing here. So the effects of feedback on groups and pairs. Do you remember last time we were speaking about the pair working? That is quite important. In the feedback, you will see how, this is one of the features, how it's so important to let them work in pair or in small groups. In fact, providing feedback to groups or pair students in the classroom will work differently than simply giving feedback to a single student. Feedback can be targeted to the pair or groups rather than just to one person. For example, a teacher could pair students up to practice phrases relating to express one's opinion. The teacher will provide immediate, implicit feedback to the pairs of students as they practice, and then some delayed explicit feedback about the opinion exchanges when after they have finished the task. So one thing is say, oh, you made a mistake, but you're addressing to a couple of people, so they're not feeling like they are completely wrong because they are part of a team. So you're talking to a team and you're not blaming anybody. That is usually teenagers feel, you know, the correction as, shame on you. This is something that we should always avoid. Okay, and that is the first part.
Thank you.
Thanks to you. So now let me have a, what do you think about it? How do you use it? Because I'd like to know your comments, and I think that you do use everything I said, everything I said, most of them. And I think that you also agree on the theories I was mentioning, because those theories, especially if you read about, for example, Russian life, they say that he's a political activist. And, you know, Gabby, of course, I'm sure she's well aware that in the States, they were against second language acquisition at early age. They were really strong against it, but that was a political feature because, of course, we are speaking about Spanish speakers, and so.
It was an immigrant issue.
Yeah, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, what Russian said is proved in classroom, is proved in, and now is proven as true, as real. Okay, let's do a bit of practice. Let's start a bit with planning lessons online. The stages of a lesson. Always the digital classroom. Never forget where we are starting from. Our starting point is the digital classroom. So the theories are good, but what we said in our first module, that it's important who we are, the teacher that we are, and the way we are in a classroom should be the same, either if we are in a real class in a group or we are teaching online. We should maintain and follow the same theories according, you know, make adjustments here and there, sometimes many adjustments. So which are the 5 stages of a lesson? This is a normal lesson, but you can apply to digital lessons as well. So in this module, we will elaborate on the 5 stages of an effective language lesson for a live online class session with examples of each. In the first stage of the lesson, a teacher starts with an outline of the session and then uses a warm-up to introduce students to a topic. Then the language is presented to the student through an authentic resource. Next, the student practices the language with feedback from the teacher. Last, a lesson ends with a summary on the language presented and a reminder about what was accomplished. Of course, this stage, it doesn't mean that you have to follow them in each lesson and every time. You are, remember always what I did. I'm not with you in the class. It's important what you do, but keep in mind that you can have help from organizing something like that. Then if you decide that you don't need outline warmer or other points, it's up to you because you know who the audience, who are in the audience, and that is the most important thing. But, you know, to know theory is important. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Gabby. thank you for highlighting, because, you know, it's important for me. That's my feedback. That's so important. Yes, it's really important, actually.
I just remind teachers to
That's it. Yes, because I'm sure I'm just repeating
exactly.
something that you know, of course, you know, but they know, and you've already told them.
Although I always say, when you're starting out, what Paola just showed you, outline, warmer, presentation, feedback, summary, is very important to follow at the beginning when you don't have the experience to walk
Yes.
to a classroom, okay? And just improvise. Okay, that can happen when you have tons of experience. If you don't, and even when you have tons of experience, sometimes you need to, you know, you need to just set things out so you know exactly what you're doing when you're in there. Okay, this is very important. It also helps you with anxiety. At the beginning, we're all anxious when we get into the classroom, right, Paola?
Yeah, so much.
Stomach.
Especially in the new class.
Exactly. And this keeps you like keeps your anxiety level down because you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know exactly what you're doing.
But anyway, sometimes, you know, I'm improvising my lesson. I mean, I don't improvise because I got tons of lesson on my shoulders. So I'm improvising, but on online, I can't do it.
Oh, you can't online.
No, you can't, because you can improvise, but you can't stand up and go in and take something. I mean, you have to have everything handy. And if you don't make a plan, of course, you don't have anything handy.
Exactly.
Because, yeah, you have to stop your lesson online, and then, especially with kids, you lose them completely.
They're gone, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's see these stages. Outline. At the beginning of each live class session, teachers should outline or give an overview of the session and state the class objectives. It may also be helpful to give an overview of specific technology tools. This is basic, this is important, especially in the first lessons, because they could not be aware of the tools they are going to use. So the student might need to access to effectively participate in and in a class session, the chat box open, the video on, specific link open, and so on. So providing an outline and stating the objectives help teacher or tutor as much as they help the student. Outlining the session helps the student understand what to expect and keeps the teachers or tutor on track. Laying out the objectives of the session helps the student connect the lesson to his or her goals and expectations, especially when they are adults. When you say, today we're speaking about this and that, they prefer it. I mean, they don't want surprises. For kids, it's different, but even if you don't elect what you're going to do, actually, you have done it for yourself. A warm-up. A warmer or warm-up activity involves a question used at the beginning of session after the outline and objectives. A good warmer is related to the topic and can be easily answered by all students. Warmers play an important role in teaching sessions for two reasons. First, they help the teachers assess the learner's level and interest in the topic. Secondly, they give the students some time to get used to speaking English and to become comfortable with the teacher. You remember the I plus 1 plus I, this is the warmer basic thing, I plus 1 plus I. A teacher needs to, a teacher needs to use a presentation model to serve as input for the students in a class. Seeing or hearing a sample of the target language is essential before students can begin to produce it. For example, before students can attempt to introduce themselves, they need to listen or to read about people doing the same. All lessons should contain a model with the target language in it. Without one, a lesson would be very confusing for students and teachers. Practice, of course. After students are exposed to the target language through authentic input during the presentation stage of the lesson, the students should have the opportunity to practice what they learned. Remember, the best way to practice new vocabulary or new language structure is by completing an authentic task related to the topic. I'm gonna give you so many examples that you will be really full of them. And of course, feedback again. At appropriate intervals during the practice stage, feedback should be provided and the students should be allowed to reattempt the assigned practice task. For example, students could be tasked to introduce themselves to each other, followed by teacher feedback, and then reattempt introductions with the feedback in mind. Remember to use such features as chat or screen sharing to support students and provide effective feedback. The summary. At the end of each session, both the teacher or tutor and student should summarize what was learned in the session. Student summary, their summary, asking the student what he or she learned in the session is a great way to assess your session. The student summary will give you insight into what the student is remembering and focusing on. And then the teacher summary. Summarizing the student progress will help the student understand why you did what you did in the session and how it can help him or her reach their goals. For teenagers, for children, it's very easy. For adults, believe me, sometimes it's very hard because they do not recognize themselves to go on and to improve. They think they're not improving, probably because their goals is a bit too high, so they want to learn very fast. So they do not see the real improvement, and you have to point out of them, because of course praising them is very important, much more on adults than on children. So how we can develop a lesson plan? While there are many formats for a lesson plan, depending on the school or learning institution, that's why I was, is the second part that I was telling you about, it is a lesson plan for adults. Most lesson plans anyway contain some of all of these elements below. So the title of the lesson, the time required to complete the lesson. Actually, I always prepare longer lesson because, you know, always have a plan B. And sometimes there are some activities they don't work. So you have to change to another activity, and or the time required that you were foreseen is not correct because maybe it's a new activity. So probably you thought that it could last for, I don't know, 5 minutes. Instead, it lasts for 10. And, you know, sometimes when you have 10 minutes more or 5 minutes more, it could be a problem in some classes. So the list of required materials that you always have, even when you are in a physical class, but here it's even more important, as we mentioned, including technology. Technology too, for example, learning platform, website, etc. Then the list of objectives, both behavioral objectives, what the student can do at lesson completion, or knowledge objective, what the student knows at lesson completion. The presentation activity that focuses student on the lesson skills or concepts. This includes showing picture or models, asking leading questions, or reviewing previous lessons. That can be even, I think that reviewing previous lessons is always very productive, especially because you don't have always the same number of students. Some they are not present, and so you have to, anyway, do not forget, okay, that is done. No, you have to repeat and try to reviewing the previous, especially if you were proposing something that is in the basic language. An instructional component that includes the teacher instructional input and, where appropriate, a guided practice by students to consolidate new skills and ideas. Independent practice that allows students to extend skills or knowledge on their own. This is something that is much more difficult to do in a online lesson plan, but we can add for a homework. A summary during which the teacher wraps up the discussion and plans to answer questions. It is important to anticipate the types of questions prior to the live session. An evaluation component of a test for mastery of instructed skills or concepts, such as a set of questions to answer or tasks to complete. An analysis component, this is especially for adults, that the teacher uses to reflect, and for the teachers, of course, on the lesson itself, such as what worked and what needs to be improved in future class sessions. This is something that if you've been working in a language school, you're always demanding to do an analysis of your lessons. So this module usually includes the following detailed topics too. Lesson plan development. This is the adult teaching, that one that I was telling you. Oh, sorry. Okay. Objective in a lesson plan. Setting objective in a lesson planning. Lesson objective. Differentiated instructions. Understanding instructional scaffolding. Different types of lessons plans. Creating a lesson plan for receptive skills, creating a lesson plan for productive skill, but they are mostly related to teaching to adults. These are my one small group of adults I had last year, and they're still. And so, Gabby, these are the things that I was cutting from this session, but if you want, we can get into even now if you want. But you need you see, they are very specific and they are.
I would like to get into them because anyways, this is the path we're going to be following anyways. So we're going to be following both children target and the adult target. So if it's not a problem for you, if you want to structure a different session, no problem, as you wish, Paula.
Let me see. So you know what the time is now? Because I'm
6, almost 6, 5 to 6.
I think we can do it. So if you have time to do it,
yeah,
we can do it.
Until 7:30. We were all booked until 7:30, so we're fine.
Good, good. Okay. So let me see. That second part that I prepared and that I say, oh no, I was preparing so many slides, and you know the feeling when we say, oh no, they are not appropriate. because you know, all this stuff could be here. Let me see.
I wasn't 100% sure we were going to launch this in September, and then today I had a meeting and it's happening. So I was about to tell you.
Okay.
It's just, it's going to happen.
Okay. Let me. This is because while I was, you know, making revision, you know, when you are doing this, you say, ah, this is interesting too. Ah, gosh, this is interesting too as well. So you're going to put a lot of stuff, but sometimes, and then you say, no, maybe it's too much now. Lesson objective, lesson plan. I have to put in order some of the slides because okay. Probably you will find some mistakes in this presentation because I didn't close it, so it's not completely finished, and probably even, you know, in the way I'm putting the writing, you don't care. I know you don't care. It's the meaning that is important. But you know,
Yes.
so you see, you even see how I work.
Okay.
Before getting that nice presentation, I'm working a lot on them. So this is just very rough, very rough. And I'm going to blame me because it's so rough, but it doesn't matter. I know that you understand, and the meaning is important.
Exactly. That's what we were looking for.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So let's share my screen again. Okay. Okay. Oh, here, there's even, you know, something. These are the mistakes that I don't like, but I don't care. Lesson plans. Okay. Insert the title of your presentation. Ah, yeah. Terrible. No problem. Okay, because, okay. Okay. So lesson plan development. Developing a lesson plan for an live online class session can sound like a daunting task for someone who has never done it, or a tiring one for someone who does them frequently. Nevertheless, having a good understanding of lesson plan development can help us design better plans and deliver more effective lessons. In this short module, we will discuss some of the different types of lesson plans for different purposes, and we will learn a basic structure to follow for just about any lesson. So, while there are many formats for a lesson plan, depending on the school or learning institution, this is the same thing that I was preparing in the other one, but let's recast it. The title of the lesson, the time required to complete the lesson, list of required materials, including technology tools, learning platforms, websites, etc. List of objectives, both behavioral objective, what the students can do at the lesson completion, or knowledge objective, what the student knows at lesson completion. The presentation activity that focuses students on the lesson, skill, or concept. These include showing pictures or models, asking leading questions, or reviewing previous lessons. And these are the same thing that we've already had in the other presentation. So I'm going now. Of setting objective in lesson planning. So this is not, be careful, because setting objective doesn't mean make an agenda. It's something very important, even the agenda, but this is setting objective in lesson planning. So before designing our online lessons activities and selecting materials for authentic input, A teacher must first create an objective or a statement of purpose for the overall lesson. An objective statement should answer what students will be able to do by the end of the lesson. The lesson objective drives the whole lesson. This is important. Never lose it. Your objective you have to keep in mind, like, you know, a post-it that you have in front of you. It is the reason the lesson exists. Care should be taken when creating the objective or objectives for each class, as will determine the activities the student will engage in and the tasks they will be able to complete at the lesson's end. By creating clear, measurable objectives, the teacher also ensures that the lesson plan goals are compatible with the developmental level of the students and that the student achievement expectations are reasonable and aligned with their expressed needs. Understanding instructional scaffolding. Here is the instructional scaffolding. What is it? The scaffolding is something to do with building, of course. It's a teaching process designed to promote a deeper level of learning.
Let my teachers answer this question.
Okay.
Let them tell you, what is scaffolding? What is scaffolding, Maria?
Scaffolding is when you're teaching and when a certain concept is learned by the students, you introduce a new concept to the students. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
on the previous knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
That is scaffolding. Okay, thank you. Just checking.
Yes, it's a big support, like when you are building when you are yes, building a building. I mean, the scaffolding is the support given during instruction, which is tailored to the needs of the student with the intention of helping the student achieve his or her learning goals. So it has to be considered even if it's one-on-one or in a class. Always have to be, you have to use the instructional scaffolding. Is the provision of sufficient support to promote learning when concepts and skills are being first introduced to students. So keep in mind that in an online class session, you may also need to provide support for how to navigate the learning platform and use the digital tools. For example, I run some courses with Moodle. Do you know Moodle?
No.
Have you ever tried it? Moodle is a big platform. It's the platform that the biggest university use here in Italy and all around the world. But actually it's a very complex platform in comparison with other platforms. They're just more recent. Moodle is quite old. And actually to ask the students to navigate in a very complicated platform, usually it requires an extra lesson. For example, even the universities here in Italy, they do use Moodle platform or other internal platform that, believe me, are really, really hard to get. And so you do not have to, for example, what I do is giving the student a kind of, it doesn't come out when you are explaining with the example, a tutorial. I'm giving a tutorial on how to use WhatsApp Web. You know, WhatsApp Web is a basic tool, very important, very easy to use, but a lot of people before the COVID, they didn't use it at all because they use WhatsApp just on the smartphone. but they didn't know that they could use WhatsApp even on the laptop because there's a way of you. I think that you know them. Did you? Do you know how to use WhatsApp web?
No, I
No?
don't.
I do.
No.
Of course you do. I'm not asking you. You shut up. Yeah, but for example, when I'm giving you a link and I send you via WhatsApp, what you do if you want to use it on your laptop? How do you copy on your laptop? What do you do usually? Elena and Maria, tell me what you do usually.
Sorry?
If I give you a link, I send you a link, for example, even the link to be connected on Zoom. I give you the link, you want to be connected on Zoom with your laptop, but I send you the link on WhatsApp. What do you do?
Well, I enter the password and the number manually on my laptop.
I share it by email.
Yeah, that is.
So I send it over.
Easier. You just open WhatsApp web with using your smartphone. If you see your smartphone at the top right, you got the 3 points. When you open that part, they come out a serial of things, and one is written WhatsApp web. So you digit on your laptop WhatsApp web, and just a normal site is opening. Then you take your smartphone and you go in front of it. They just talk to each other like a mirror, and then on your laptop you have your WhatsApp, and that's easy because in that way I'm sending you the link, you just click on it and that's done. You don't have to copy anything from anywhere. Oh, Elena is going out. Okay, she's back. Okay. Let's wait for Elena. Oh, you went. Are you with us, Elena?
Yes, yes, yes. I don't know.
Okay, okay.
Probably something happened to the connection. I don't know.
Don't worry, it happens.
So you were saying, I lost it, that you open WhatsApp web and then your smartphone and the web.
Yeah, use the smartphone, the laptop and the smartphone talk to each other. They see each other, and the laptop is becoming the mirror of your smartphone. So if I'm sending you a link on your on WhatsApp, you see it on your laptop. You just click on it and it's opening. And that's fantastic, especially if you have to send documents. I send documents on WhatsApp and you receive directly them on your computer. You don't have to pass on the email, send email. You don't need the email anymore, actually, for this immediate things. It's very, very quick. And then you don't run the risk of making mistakes when you are copying something, because you're not, you're just clicking directly. And that was something that you need. I mean, it's not just during the lesson, you have to do it. So this support may include the following resources: a compelling task, templates and guides, outlines, and key questions. Use of instructional scaffolding in various contexts. They should include modeling a task, giving advice, providing coaching like we just made it now, guidance on the development of cognitive and social skills. These supports are gradually removed, of course, as students develop autonomous learning strategies, those promoting their own cognitive, affective, and psychomotor learning skills and knowledge. Teachers help the student master a task or a concept by providing support. Do not think that if you are teaching English, you're just teaching English. You are an educator, 100%, always. So everything you say, anything you say, it's important, it's relevant to them. So be very careful, and at the same time, do not forget and do not give for granted anything, because you don't know which previous knowledge they have, even if they are adults, or especially if they are adults. Probably with the teenagers and with the children, you can even try to guess which level they are, and approximately, depending on the kind of education they receive, it's more or less the same. But with adults, they can be very, very differentiated levels that they reached. So you need a differentiated instruction. This instruction and assessment is a student-centered practice in which teachers effectively provide students with varied avenues to learning that best meet the student needs, interests, and learning characteristics. Teachers can differentiate instruction at a variety of stages in the learning process. They can differentiate the content taught, the process by which it is taught, the final product required for assessment, and the delivery method used. In this way, individual students can learn effectively in ways most motivating and engaging for them. One great strategy for implementing differentiated instruction in your online class sessions is by offering students choice regarding topics or content and the ways in which they complete practice and assessment tasks. Let's take a look of an example used in the lesson during which students are preparing for a job interview. And here I was closing it because I wasn't preparing the job interview. I mean, just this one. Okay, let's try not to, I mean, this is the theory. The student will be able to answer questions about their work history during a job interview. Of course, this is just for adults. Even though the objective is the same for each student, the content of this lesson can be differentiated by student interest and personal experience. Of course, each one has got its own story history. The student can choose which type of job they will be mock interviewing for instead of the teacher designing the scenario. The process by which the material is delivered and practiced can also be differentiated to best engage individual students, especially if you got individuals. For example, some students may prefer to listen to an example interview, while others prefer to read example interview questions and responses before practicing. Also, some students may feel comfortable role-playing an interview with a partner or with the teacher, while others might prefer to record their answer alone before practicing with a partner or small group. Students who might need more language support than others can be given sentence or dialogue frames or fill-in-the-blank templates, they are very good, to complete while participating in their mock interview. By giving students options, they will more be likely to engage in the learning process in an authentic and autonomous, especially autonomous way, and are more likely to successfully meet the lesson objective. Okay, what are the objectives in a lesson plan? What do you have to keep in mind? After conducting a need analysis, that is what we were talking at the beginning, the analysis of the needs of our student or our group, we should have a good idea of what our students need and want to learn. And we are ready to create a general objectives for our course. We wasn't week 4 for us because it was week 2, sorry. Objectives should be clear, measurable statements that tell what the student should know and be able to do by the end of the course of lesson. Course objectives state what the learner will be able to do, of course in the English language in our case, by the end of the course. Lesson objectives are specific to each lesson, stating what the learners will be able to do by the end of the lesson or class session. It is important to think about what we want our learners to do and what functions or tasks they will be able to carry out by the time we conclude the lessons or the part of lessons. I mean, it depends, or group of lessons. Those who are not familiar with objective writing might have a tendency to state what action the teacher will do during the lesson, or simply write a list of activities that everyone do during the class. And this is what I mentioned before. These are not lesson objectives. They are course agenda items, which are different but also necessary. But do not confuse with the list of the things you are doing in a session. This is not the objectives. The objectives are something completely different, as you see. Okay, for example, let's imagine that one of our course objectives states, students will be able to complete everyday tasks around the city, okay? One of the tasks included being able to order food at a restaurant, which will be the focus of a specific lesson or session. Your lesson objectives for this session should state specific tasks they will complete, such as students will be able to ask servers for coffee or water. Students will be able to ask the server what ingredients are in certain items on the menu. Students will be able to tell the server which menu item they want and how many of each item. There could be more objectives than those mentioned, of course, but these are just some ideas. That is not just ordering from a menu that is basic. This is a bit more, the objective is much more detailed. When you write your objectives before writing any other part of the lesson plan, you will be able to create the rest of the plan with ease because you have a direction. The objective drives the lesson, and the students should know what they are at the start of each lesson. This creates clear communication between the teacher and the students and can help students to feel more confident about what they are learning. Okay, and let's understand then the instructional scaffolding. As you know, careful consideration and crafting of measurable objectives is the first priority in lesson planning. Once this has been done, it is important to design your lesson activities and materials by incorporating aspects of instructional scaffolding. In week 2, not 4, you actually, this is not applicable to our course because I cut it this. I cut that was much more longer, that was in 4 weeks, and we decided to make in 3 meetings, so it was just different. So anyway, we mentioned that the instructional scaffolding is a teaching technique designed to promote a deeper level of learning, and Maria just confirmed it. Teachers incorporate scaffolding or support throughout the learning process. This support should be tailored. Sorry, this is wrong. Some mistakes that I have to correct, to the needs of each student with the intention of helping the student achieve its learning goals. Let's take a look at some example of instructional scaffolding, because otherwise the theory is just going on air, and we have to be concentrated on what is actually with some example in each part. So often teachers use scaffolding techniques in the warmer, so at the beginning of the lesson. They can use activities such as a discussion questions, mind or word maps, very useful, and or familiar images to help students connect to the lesson's content. If you are using some text, modern text, of course you see that in each unit they start like this, with something that is familiar or something that is a revision of something, and this is just an example of instructional scaffolding. In this way, students begin the lesson with an accessible task before moving to the newer, more challenging concepts. Teachers also use scaffolding techniques in the presentation by referring to a model of desired text, a dialogue, short paragraph, for example. After presenting the model, the teachers give the student more responsibility by asking them to repeat the model or fill in key information. Finally, a teacher might ask the student to draft their own example. And then teachers, not finally because I repeated finally twice, another mistake, the teachers can individualize the lesson by implementing scaffolding techniques in the practice. Depending on the student's needs and abilities, the teacher might offer more or less support during the practice. It is always important to consider what type of support may be needed for your students during each part of an online session, so that you can create well-prepared and accessible materials for lesson activities. And this is the just what we are going to talk about next meeting, the practical part, what to produce, how to produce them, and not why, because we are speaking about the why, and we will speak about the how. Okay, the differentiated instruction. As you learned previously, not before, this is the differentiated instruction and assessment is an important educational framework and practice that encourages teachers to provide different avenues of learning based on student ability and not just ability. Teachers should consider various factors such as culture, socioeconomic status, language, mother language, gender, motivation, ability or disability, and a student's personal interest when planning for the online lessons. In this way, teachers can make sure that the content and tasks are designed to best meet the individual learning needs of each student, even if in a class those characteristics can be very that could be very different depending on students. You should try not to leave back anybody. Much like instructional scaffolding, teachers can differentiate instructions at each part of the lesson. During the warmer, teachers can differentiate instructors by tailoring the content to a student's background, knowledge, and experience. I was just mentioning to you when I was speaking about a conversation class to start with those that are more outgoing, but it could be that in a class you have somebody that has got some disabilities. So you have to consider and even be prepared to prepare something like some techniques or some exercises tailor-made for them, just for them, that can be different from the one that you are given to everybody. Teachers can differentiate instructions during presentation by providing students with graphic organizer or supplemental materials to help them better understand and master the new language or skill taught. Finally, teachers differentiate their practice for students depending on their individual needs and abilities. While keeping in mind the objective of the lesson, never forget it, teachers can design a variety of assessments that allow the learner to demonstrate mastery of the objective in a way most suitable for their learning style and needs. So you have to be prepared to give the same kind of exercise given in different ways. In general, online ESL courses tend to be smaller than traditional learning environments. So differentiated instruction should be a less challenging task than it would be while teaching a group of 30 or more people, students, face-to-face. You can focus on setting expectations around the abilities of your individual students. What different types of lesson plans? Let me see, because I'm afraid that okay. So we understand the important concept to consider when writing objectives and designing course support materials. We now can take a closer look at different types of lesson plans. The lesson plan will outline how the objectives are met and the materials used. The lesson plan will detail the activities of the lesson and time devoted to each activity. The focus on our lesson will depend on many factors, of course, and one of them being the skills that we want our students to develop during a class session. It is often challenging to teach reading, writing, listening, and speaking equally in the same session. So there is a tendency in ESL instruction to focus on one or two of the skills in each lesson or class session. It also depends on the length of your lesson. But of course, while in a face-to-face lesson, we can have lesson of more than 2 hours. In an online, it's not. I do not suggest to have more than 1 hour 15, no more, because especially with kids, 1 hour it's enough for them to keep the attention on. So we have also to reconsider what it is our students want to learn. If our students want to practice for a job interview, the usual one, this lesson plan and activities should be primarily focused on listening and speaking, of course. We also take into account whether the student needs to work on productive or receptive skills more. Some students might need to produce written and spoken language for their jobs on a test, while others may have other goals that require them to be able to listen and read English. The type of lesson plans we design will depend mostly on learners' goals and needs. For example, in my last adult, one of my last adults group, they just refused to write because I'm trying to introduce a bit of writing, a bit of, something here and then, but they just refuse it to write. I can't oblige adults to do what they can't because they want to communicate. And for them, writing is something that is belonging to their teenager learning. So they don't want to write. Actually, I don't blame them. I blame the school system that was just let them writing so much without letting them speaking. Now they can speak, they don't stop. Okay, receptive skills. So lesson planning is about deciding what the student will do in the lesson to best meet the course and lesson objectives. In a receptive skills lesson, the teacher must include a task that requires the student to read or listen to the language. Read or listen to the language. For example, reading or listening to instructions. Remember to choose a task that is relevant to the learner's goals and needs. It is critical that teachers evaluate students' listening or reading skills by asking comprehension questions about the material. I'm not gonna give, I cut the example of a receptive skill, or let me see if I cut it, because I don't remember which slides I cut it off. So I think, yes, we have the lesson plan. Okay, okay. Lesson plan. This is receptive skill. Okay, remember receptive, reading and
Listening.
good. Objective. Students will be able to identify keywords and demonstrate comprehension of airport announcements. Warmer, in pairs, if possible, or in groups. Students will discuss the following question and then share with the class. What experience have you had traveling through airports? What are some common types of airport announcements that you hear when traveling through an airport? Now the presentation. Students will listen to a short airport announcement while the teacher points out key aspects of the announcement, including common vocabulary and phrases, by reading them or just repeating that. Task. Students will listen to the real airport announcement in pairs. After each announcement, students will summarize them and answer comprehension questions about specific information given in each announcement. The teacher gives feedback on their understanding and their responses, of course. Summary. The teacher summarizes what the students did today and what they learned. And then the next step, for homework, students will listen to a series of common announcements made in airplanes and answer questions about them. Easy. This is 1 hour lesson complete. Even more if you want to let them discuss more. But even if they just reply with short answer, nothing to, they don't get involved too much at the beginning, then they start, especially if you ask them to discuss to each other. And now, creating a lesson plan for productive skills. Okay, productive. Lesson plans for productive skills are aimed at developing the learner's speaking or writing skills. In productive skills lessons, the teacher selects a task that requires the student to speak or write in the target language. For example, checking in at the airport or write an email to a friend. The task should always be related to the learner's goals and needs. So you see the structure is still the same, both if you are planning for productive or other skills, okay? It's the same completely, but you are developing in a different way. So the feedback from the teacher is particularly important in speaking and writing lessons. The teacher should be sure to give feedback on meaning, word choice, and pronunciation. Here is a sample lesson. Okay. Students will be able to order at a restaurant. Warmer. In pairs, always if it's possible, students will discuss the following question and then share with the class. How often do you go to a restaurant? What type of restaurants do you like to go to? What qualities make a restaurant good or bad? The presentation. The class will listen to an audio of a person ordering food at the restaurant. Students will discuss what the person ordered and what common phrases and expressions were used. Task. Students will role play ordering lunch at the restaurant in pairs or individually if to let work them in pairs is getting too difficult, depending also on the number of the group. The teacher gives feedback to each pair on meaning, word, choice, and pronunciation. Summary. The teacher summarized what the students did today and what they learned. Next step, for homework, students will choose a real menu from a restaurant and record themselves ordering breakfast or dinner or lunch. Okay, that's what I was preparing. You know, there's no thank you. There's nothing that I have added because it was the starting point. And then we could get into the practical examples. What I told you that for next time I have prepared something for our meeting 3 that are learning tips and suggestions, and I've used so many examples and links and fantastic tools that we should be aware of using them. Actually, I also invite you, if you want, to go on my YouTube channel where there are so many lessons. Some of them, for example, another thing that I'm obliged to do, I cannot speak in English in all the lessons 100%. I can't, because my students, they do not allow me to do that, in the sense that I'm speaking and they are replying in Italian and so on. And for example, I got some groups of ladies. They do want to speak English because we create a kind of group, and even the group is important because I know we always going out together, and so this is dependent. But if you want to have a look to some lessons there, of course the lessons where they are for the kids, they are not online because they are privately, for the privacy. I don't publish anything with the kids, but next time I will show you some example with kids. So I will tell you even next time, please do not publish or share what I'm going to send it to you, because some of them, there are kids inside. But
recordings are exclusive for our teachers. They cannot leave our Google Drive. They've all signed a non-disclosure.
Good. No problem. Until this lesson, there's no problem because there weren't any kids in it. But next lesson, in some, I've tried to obscure the faces. I mean, I did it. But some of them, as the short clips, there are so many. And I think they're useful even to see how the children react when you speak.
Exactly.
And if I obscure the faces, of course, you don't see them, and it's a pity. So I will do it, but please, yes, I trust you.
No one is allowed. They have signed an agreement that says that they can't share whatever material is on the drive for us, and whatever, anything that goes in the training. They can't do that.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Okay, I think that for today it's enough. What do you think? What do you think? Do you agree? Yes.
It
Take
was
something to drink.
plenty.
Yeah.
Think about. So we're meeting again on Friday, right, Paula?
Yes, yes. So again on Friday, this time, the same time.
Okay.
And be prepared because there's a lot of input I'm gonna give you because we get into the practical part. So example, how to do this, how to do that. And I please you, if you have any question, for example, any suggestion, because I'm trying just to give you suggestion and hints, but of course you got your own ones. But if your teachers would need, I don't know how, for example, I don't know anything, you can ask me now, doesn't come up, but it could be anything like, how do I prepare, tell me something, how do I prepare something?
Main issue on, let's say, online teaching is sharing, screen sharing material.
Yeah, screen share.
That
And
is.
so, but I'm giving you a lot of stuff next time. So we will finally, we also enjoy it because I know that this session has been quite heavy because there was,
I love it.
Yeah, thank you. There was a lot of theory, and you know, sometimes theory is like being in school, being back to school, but you know, we need something to work on it, because if we just say scaffolding and you don't know anything about it, they're just words, and we don't need them. We need to work with those words. Do you agree?
Exactly. Yes, definitely. My teachers are well prepared because I've been stressing on things. And so, yeah, well, thank you, Paula. It was excellent.
Thank you. Okay.
Much. Okay.
Okay, so I see you in a couple of days. And that's it. I'm gonna send you everything.
Thank you. The drive, and those of the naughty ones who didn't follow today can catch up.
Yes, of course.
Not ones. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.